On November 28th in London, we will be playing the Unwinnable game.
A psychologically unsafe game of failing agile transformations.
This will be a group party game. Competitive or collaborative is for the players to decide. It's going to be an exploration of the conditions that either enable or disable effective change in organizations. Now, in advance of this game, I've put together a learning games canvas to help think through some of the considerations to make sure that we have an impactful experience, and I wanted to share those with you today. So here is the Unwinnable game learning canvas, and let's zoom in on these questions. So first and foremost, the desired outcome. So what skills or knowledge do we want our players to develop? What mental models are they going to gain or adapt? And how will we know if we've reached a successful outcome in this game? So I would like players to experience what it's like to work in a unsafe organization that's doing Agile, quote unquote, without a belief in people or any degree of psychological safety. And why? To help create some empathy and new insight for the survival strategies that people have to go through day by day, month by month, year by year in organizations like this. I want to help draw some connections of what it means to not align people around a common cause and purpose for change, and helping explore the belief that people need to be at the heart of organizations. Particularly that people belief in a perspective of an agile mindset. I'd like to make this a role-playing game effectively, so people are taking different roles within this organization. They'll be bringing parts of themselves and their past experiences for sure, but it's also a chance to step into different shoes. And just reflecting then that the roles within the game likely reflect real-world scenarios and challenges as well. Next box down is around player motivations. So who are the player personas, effectively like the user group for the game itself? What intrinsic or extrinsic rewards does this game offer them? And how will we make sure that people remain engaged? So I was thinking about this, that it's about agilists, so scrum masters, agile coaches, that kind of space, to explore the transformation from the perspective of others in the organization. It's also for organizational leaders to look at the consequences, or perhaps the unintended consequences that may come from a lack of alignment in their people around a transformation. And then for managers of people to help build awareness of how they act and the impact of how they act and behave. So this game creates a space to help people build new perspectives, and importantly, it's creating shared narratives that people can take back to their organization. Or organizations, right? Because there's going to be multiple people from different backgrounds, different contexts coming together to play. And players are going to be engaged by continuing to have agency throughout the game. So we can play it over a number of rounds. And while people might have particular roles that are less empowered than others in the gameplay during this round, everyone will have an equal voice during feedback and reflection loops. So we can step out of some of the role playing to make sure that we have equivalence as players in the game. So right up front, I want to talk about some of the ethical considerations of this game. So in this part of the canvas, we're thinking about how does the game promote positive behaviors and discourage negative ones? Are there any social, cultural, or political sensitivities? And how do you handle player safety, privacy, and data? So what I intend to do for the Unwinnable game is to make sure that we have a pre and post safety check-in and check-out. That's like the core protocol, effectively, from Living Greatness. And this is going to help, intended to help separate the roles that we're playing in the game from the actual people that we are. I think along with the core protocols to check in, check out, I'm going to include the right to pass in and out without judgment as well. So within this space, what happens in the game stays in the game. We'll think about confidentiality then from the experiences that you have, particularly if it generates any vulnerable moments. They stay within the context of the game. They're not for you to share specific instances outside of that space. And then I'd like to invite players to bring as much of themselves as they feel comfortable to do so, or perhaps a little bit uncomfortable, thinking about like that circle of like comfort, discomfort, and then panic. I don't want people stretching into the panic zone. Let's just get a little bit comfortable with a bit of discomfort, perhaps. And then I'd like to frame this game as an experimental experience in itself. Like, we haven't had the opportunity to do a significant amount of playtesting in advance of the very first meetup. That meetup is part of the playtest. And so it's very important that we recognize that and that we're entering it in a space of mutual inquiry, inquisitiveness, curiousness. And that means that we need to respect one another as we're playing and take this as a consideration at all times. And so I like to build in humor to keep that human connection and the spirit of the meetup intact. So the mechanics then of the game. So what are the rules and guidelines of the game? What are the social mechanics that determine how players interact? And what choices can players make? And what are the consequences of those choices? So players are going to be divided into a number of different teams. And they'll also be divided into groups of either knowledge workers, like people in teams, and then the managers of those teams. Managers are actually going to be a part of a team, but also will have extra responsibilities to go outside of their team and report to a senior leadership team. Each knowledge worker is going to get a secret survival strategy that they have to play to. This is like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, or games like Avalon or The Resistance. Then managers are also going to have a secret strategy that they play to that will be based on action logics. So some people might be playing an expert action logic, some of us an achiever. There's going to be some opportunists in there as well. And so we'll see the impact of different action logics and different survival strategies that people are playing and see what that brings to the dynamic. Which means that every single game is also going to be different because people are going to be bringing different interpretations of those strategies. And then I guess also their own game strategies into play as well. So this game is going to be played over a number of rounds, as I said. I'm thinking it'll probably be something a bit like Scrum, just the mechanical aspects of Scrum, not the spirit. Perhaps soulless Scrum is the way of describing the mechanics of the game itself. Each round, each team must plan and deliver work that they're going to accomplish. That'll probably be quite abstracted away. And then we're going to generate metrics and measure them. And at the end of each round, there's going to be a senior leadership review. I think the senior leadership team is probably going to be game facilitators, so people I select to take on specific roles there. And then that means that each round, the players in each team must decide how much to plan, how much to work together or not work together to deliver on that plan each round. And because people have got their different survival strategies, that is going to be a difficult thing to accomplish in itself. You'd think that people would be working towards common goals, but we're deciding, or we're exploring how the fact that in an unsafe psychological environment, that may not necessarily be the case. Over on the canvas as well, I wanted to think about levels of abstraction or simulation from a visual, mechanical, narrative perspective. Clearly, this is a narrative-based game, right? We're helping create shared stories that we can take back to our respective real worlds. So very much simulating the narrative aspect. And then from a mechanics perspective, because we're doing some, what I call it, soulless Scrum, there will be some reality there. We'll be generating metrics. That's a degree of simulation, closer to simulation than an abstraction. And even from a visualization perspective, I'm anticipating we'll use some visual indicators like a Kanban board, for example, and we'll be generating some metrics in real time so we can visualize them as if they were real. So at the moment, I've got it in the border between abstract and simulation, but reality is it could be a little bit closer to the simulation side than not. The dynamics then. So if we first of all we're thinking about the mechanics of the game, now it's the dynamics. So how do the mechanics of the game actually evolve in response to player actions? What challenges or obstacles will players need to overcome, and how will they do so? And then what emergent strategies or behaviors arise from this? So as I said, there's going to be secret cards that they're going to work against each other. Senior leaders are going to make tough decisions for teams that don't perform, and then players may adapt their strategies in response to this each round. Teams may decide to interact and work together in unexpected ways. Similar, like managers may choose to collaborate or compete with each other and their teams. Or, interesting enough, compete against their own team. And then, so lastly on this part, if you have mechanics and dynamics, I also want to talk about the aesthetics. So how is this going to feel? What are the emotional responses that we can expect from players? How are they going to support or amplify the desired outcome that we're looking for from this learning game? And are there any thematic elements or symbols that are going to resonate closely with our players? And I think from that part already, if you think about from the current state of agility, or sorry, should I say the current state of agile coaches, scrum masters, and is agile dead or not, this is going to resonate very strongly with people who are playing it from that background. So one thing I was very interested about in the design of this is that we're going to be giving people who are playing managers an action logic card or strategy to play. And this is an action logic they may not have developed in themselves. So, for example, you might have an expert-driven action logic, or someone with an expert-driven action logic being asked to role-play an achiever or an individualist or even a transformational action logic. And so I'm very interested to see how they're going to be able to role-play into that space. And I'm thinking this might trigger surprise, excitement, stress, frustration, or revelation. Similarly, worker players, like people who are playing as knowledge workers, are going to be given strategies that may be unfamiliar to them and may be uncomfortable or more comfortable with them. Again, this could be revelatory, it could be excitement, there could be stress or frustration. And these emotions, I want to stress, are okay to have in a learning game because we're trying to create a container and a safe environment for experimentation and exploration that we can then use to inform our decision making back in our professional careers. I think this is going to feel like organizations for many people today. Like, hey, that's my company you've modeled this on, people are going to say to us. Yes, I've modeled it on your company exactly. Thank you. All learning games have a purpose, right? Which is the outcome that we described at the beginning. But I also like to think about this specifically from constructing for player learning. And to do so, I like to use the triple loop learning model. So thinking at the first or single loop learning about rethinking. So how does the game provide immediate feedback to allow players to correct their actions? Or then reframing, second loop learning. How does the game challenge players' underlying beliefs and assumptions? And can players reassess their strategies? And then triple loop learning, reimagining. So how does the game encourage players to reflect on their broader values, principles, or systems? How does the game foster a deeper understanding of the larger context surrounding the game's challenges? So let's have a look at what I was thinking for the Unwinnable game. So single loop learning. So it's going to be played over 3 short rounds, allowing a player to adapt from one round to the next, and then giving people a chance to reflect after each round. So just single loop learning, like how can you get better at the game effectively? Double loop learning, though, is thinking about, okay, actually starting to question some of the rules of the game and perhaps the nature of their roles. I feel like this could be like the space for metagaming. In this game, metagaming is an absolutely fantastic aspect. So please, I do encourage it. And I think that they could also start to discuss the impacts of how they're approaching the game and the implications of what's happening as a result of their actions in the game and the outcome that it has. And then triple loop learning, so reimagining. So the final reflection, I'm hoping, will provide an opportunity for deeper reflection. How are the real world scenarios here playing out in their workplace? How could they approach reality differently? So how could we reconstruct some of our narratives? Players can reflect on the game parallels to the real world scenarios, the organizational dynamics and power structures at play. And then also, this is an unwinnable game, like the clue is in the name there. I would like change agents in particular to consider what success looks like in an unwinnable scenario, or what does it take to take an unwinnable scenario and create something that is meaningful in which people can succeed and thrive together. The last aspects I have for the learning game canvas are a couple of checkpoints. One is reviewing the psychological safety checklist, and then also reviewing the design for neurodiversity checklist. That second part is for future forward compatibility, as I haven't yet written that one up. Suggestions very welcome. But from a psychological safety checklist, here's a quick rundown for what I have. Yes, I make sure that people are giving consent to play, that there'll be clear rules. These, by the way, the rules will be accessible after the game for anyone else who wants to take it and explore with it themselves. I'm going to have a safety officer in place to think about monitoring well-being of people while they're playing, built-in times for timeouts, built-in confidentiality. I talked about in the ethics space. Cultural sensitivity, I've been thinking about balanced realism, making sure that we've got some realistic goals that are actually achievable within the game, making sure that we can adapt as a facilitator to the mood of people on the night and give prompt feedback. specifically built-in ethical considerations, thinking about the technical assistance, which is actually quite easy because it's going to be a paper-based game, and I'm thinking about respecting boundaries. Then I've got a number of different question marks, which I have to think about a little bit more before we come to play, which is around team selection, which is the freedom to choose based on your comfort level. So in this context, it's like, do you want to be a knowledge worker or a manager? Are there bounds that you don't want to pass while still being able to engage in the experience? I'd like to give a bit more thought to that. This game may have a little bit less in terms of like diverse mechanisms, because we're not really like the actual rounds themselves, the actions we do aren't as important as the way that you approach the considerations beforehand, like the planning aspects. I haven't really thought enough about the accessibility of the game for different needs. That goes back to the neurodiversity checklist. So that's some space I'm going to be doing some work into. Then monitoring and follow-up. Is there a process for post-game reflection and feedback to improve psychological safety? And I think that would be a very good feedback loop to build into the game. So that's everything from me today. I hope this has been valuable for you. You can access the Learning Games canvas in the link below, along with the psychological safety checklist. There's a link through to all of the materials that we're developing for the Unwinnable game, and a link to the meetup in London as well. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you there.